So Christmas is just around the corner. And as much as we will love Christmas, it becomes increasingly more noticeable how stressful the season actually is. Even as a kid, I'd notice how my parents would become more stressed out or hear them talk about how money's tight, specifically because of Christmas. And when I eventually moved out and had to do Christmas myself, I realised firsthand how Christmas actually takes a toll on us. Wondering whether you bought enough or the right things for the right people, trying to keep up with expectations that are unspoken, but more often than not, very real. And I think a lot of us feel kind of a blanket anxiety about getting it wrong. Spending too little, spending too much, forgetting someone, disappointing someone. Christmas ends up becoming something to manage rather than to celebrate. And for businesses, it's literally the biggest time of year for sales and marketing. The pressure to buy and consume intensifies as December goes on. We started with Black Friday, and then we got Black Friday weekend, and now we have a full-on month-long commercial build-up that effectively defines the season. Buying and selling has become inseparable from Christmas itself. And it's difficult not to see the parallel here where Jesus goes into the temple or turns over the tables. Not because money itself is evil, but because buying and selling had invaded a space that was intended for worship, prayer, and encounter with God. Modern Christmas often feels like the same inversion. And I think all that tells us something quite important. That Christmas, which was originally about preparing and celebrating the birth of Christ, has become something altogether different. The shift from Christmas as a feast to Christmas as an industry didn't happen suddenly. It happened gradually, as the structures that once shaped Christian life gradually shaped into completely different ones. For most of Christian history, time itself was shaped by the church. The year was shaped with fasts and feasts, and Christmas made sense within that rhythm. The Advent fast was a season of preparation, restraint, and waiting, and the feast of Christmas naturally emerged out of that discipline. Celebration followed preparation. There's this false modern assumption that we have about the medieval world that people in those times constantly worked and didn't get a break. But historically, this isn't actually true. The common medieval peasant worked from 150 to 180 days a year, whereas the modern Brit works between 210 and 225 days a year. While medieval life was physically demanding, it was punctuated by a large number of church feast seasons. These weren't just symbolic holidays, they were real times of rest, worship and celebration that were woven into the fabric of society. The church calendar didn't simply just mark time, it governed it. Feasts were communal, work stopped. It was the sacred that shaped the secular. This began to change in the rise of industrialisation. As work moved from seasonal and agricultural rhythms into factories and wage labour, time began to be reorganised around productivity rather than the spiritual life. Feast days that once shaped the entire year were gradually removed or absorbed into work schedules. And what remained were just a few number of bank holidays, disconnected from the original sacred meaning and intention. And liturgical Christmas was a casualty of that change. Instead of being a part of a broader sacred season, it was reduced to just 2 days off work and a month of commercialism. And the Advent fast, which required time and communal preparation, became more and more impractical in this changing environment. So the feast survived, but the structure that supported it didn't. At the same time, mass production and modern retail accelerated the shift. As goods became manufactured at scale, they also needed to be sold at scale, and Christmas became the ideal opportunity for this. Department stores in the 19th century actively promoted it as a time for selling gifts, moving gift-giving away from symbolic and handmade acts to bought commodities. And it's not just commodities. People these days actually pay for that Christmas experience. These days, you actually have to pay to get into a Christmas market rather than purchasing what's at the market. I think that shows that people are actually yearning for that feeling of meaning that Christmas actually used to have. But unfortunately, I don't think money can buy it. By the 20th century, advertising and mass media completed the shift. Newspapers, radio, film and TV made it possible to stretch Christmas far beyond the feast itself. Anticipation for Christmas was no longer cultivated through fasting and prayer, but through desire and consumption. The modern Christmas season was engineered to sustain for as long as possible. And as explicit Christian belief began to decline, Christmas remained, but without its spiritual centre. The Nativity faded from view and surrounding customs became more central. Santa, shopping, food and atmosphere now filled the centre that Christ once occupied. Christmas became culturally revered, but spiritually hollow. And quietly, without anyone deciding it, Christmas became something that could be celebrated without referencing Christ at all. And it's that transformation that changes everything. Not just what we do at Christmas, but what the Christmas season actually does to us. And the effects of this transformation aren't just felt leading up to Christmas. They're often felt most intensely after. At the beginning of every new year, we hear about something called Blue Monday, supposedly the most depressing day of the year. And while Blue Monday itself was proposed as a marketing idea, the post-Christmas crash is very real. Mental health organisations in the UK, including the NHS, Mind and Samaritans, consistently report an increase in demand in January, Rates of low mood, anxiety, and depression massively rise in the weeks following from Christmas and New Year. So if Christmas is supposed to be the season of joy and renewal, why do so many of us feel depleted in the days that follow? I think part of the answer relies in the rhythm of modern Christmas itself. I think it's what happened when the feast is disconnected from the preparation, and when the birth of Christ, the purpose of this season, is pushed to the margins. I think that difference in rhythm really explains why modern Christmas can feel so draining, and why earlier Christian societies experienced it as something rejuvenating and life-giving. At the heart of Christmas is not an atmosphere or a feeling or even a tradition, it's an event. For most of Christian history, the Nativity was not seen as a sentimental story, but as a mystery to be entered into, a moment where eternity breaks into time, where God enters his own creation, not with force or with spectacle, but with humility. The story begins not in Bethlehem, but in quiet obedience. A young woman in Nazareth, unknown and unnoticed, is greeted by an angel and told that she will bear God himself. There is no public celebration, no audience, no display of power, only a question and then a freely given yes. In the traditional Christian understanding, that moment matters deeply. The incarnation does not begin with a command, but with consent. God does not override human freedom, he waits for it. From that moment on, the world is changed, even though almost no one is aware of it. Mary carries Christ in hiddenness. There is no outward sign of glory, no physical protection from difficulty. The journey to Bethlehem is not dignified or convenient. It's uncomfortable, uncertain, and shaped by political decree rather than divine spectacle. And when the moment finally comes, it does not come in a palace or a home, but in a place meant for the animals. The creator of all things is born without shelter, laid in a feeding trough, wrapped in cloth. In the ancient Christian imagination, this is not incidental, it is revelation. God enters the world at its lowest point, sanctifying poverty, weakness, and obscurity from within. The first witnesses are not rulers or scholars, but shepherds, men awake in the night, living on the margins. They are called not to entertainment, but to recognition. And later, the Magi arrive bringing gifts, not to indulge in celebration, but to honour a king who has chosen humility. In the traditional Christian understanding, the Nativity is not simply about a child being born. It's about God uniting himself to human nature completely and permanently. Heaven and earth are no longer held apart. God does not remain distant or untouched. He enters hunger, cold, vulnerability, and dependence, not symbolically, but truly. This is why Christmas matters, because the incarnation means that nothing human is now outside of God's reach. Suffering, weakness, obscurity. None of these things are rejected. All of them are taken up, healed, and transformed within. And this is why Christians historically prepared so carefully, because Christmas is not just the remembrance of something that happened once. It's the proclamation that God is with us, here, now, and forever. If Christmas is truly the moment when God enters the world, then the question that naturally follows is, how are we to meet him? Traditionally, Christians have never seen Christmas as something to be marked from a distance. It wasn't simply remembered, observed, or admired. It's something that Christians entered into. The rhythms, customs, and practices around Christmas existed to help people spiritually participate in the event itself, to prepare their lives not just to celebrate Christ's birthday, but to actually receive him. In Orthodoxy, Christmas begins long before Christmas Day, with the Nativity fast, a 40-day period of spiritual preparation that begins mid-November. It's about spiritual reorientation. Food is simplified, prayer is increased, and almsgiving becomes more intentional. Attention slowly shifts from excess and distraction towards watchfulness, repentance, and patience. The fast reorientates ourselves in the direction of God. And as the weeks go on, something subtle happens. Desires begin to quieten a bit, and life slows down, even if imperfectly. Christians try as best that they can to carry this spirit right up to Christmas Eve. And then when Christmas arrives, it doesn't feel like a crash out, but as if the clouds have suddenly parted and this gentle light appears. Either late on Christmas Eve or early in Christmas morning, the church gathers for divine liturgy of the Nativity. And this is the heart of the Christmas feast. The gospel of Christ's birth is proclaimed aloud. The prayers of the church give voice to the mystery that's been awaited for centuries. And most importantly, Christians don't just hear about Christ, but they actually receive him. In Holy Communion, Christ gives himself to his people. The one who entered the world in humility gives himself again. Not symbolically, but truly in his body and blood. And only then is the fast broken. And when it is, the joy is real. But the difference is the celebration flows out of worship. The joy isn't frantic or forced. It's settled, grateful, and peaceful. And continues, not just for a day, but in the days that follow, all the way up until the eve of Theophany. And because of this rhythm, preparation and then celebration, Christmas doesn't feel exhausting. It feels like it's changing you. The weeks of prayer, restraint, and attention give the season a different kind of weight. There's less temptation to be entirely swept up in the chaos of the world, because the heart has already been anchored elsewhere. The anticipation feels deeper. The joy feels quieter but fuller. In this way, the Orthodox celebration of Christmas offers something very simple but very profound. Our gifts to Christ are not ultimately our things, but our time, attention, and devotion. And when Christmas is lived like this, it becomes what it is ultimately meant to be. Not a season we consume, but a mystery that we enter into. A blessing and a gift to celebrate, and a treasure that we all get to relish in as a family, as the church, feeling joy, happiness, and peace, whatever our earthly situation is. I'll be honest, the best years of Christmas for me are not the times where I did more, like throwing the biggest party or getting the best gifts. It was the times where I actually slowed things down a bit, when I actually started to participate in the fasts, or tried my best to get to the midweek service, or offering a helping hand to someone where I can. And none of this is perfect, but it's often been enough to reorient the season back to what its purpose is. So if Christmas for you has started to feel a little bit thin or exhausting, maybe the answer isn't a new set of decorations or that experience that you go to that you can just about afford. Instead, maybe the answer is just to simplify it a bit, to slow down enough to just be able to participate in it rather than rushing through it. And that's where, for me at least, that Christmas started to feel like Christmas again. I've got some great videos lined up for the new year, including an interview with Archimandrite Philip Hall, where he tells us about his journey in becoming Orthodox and a monk and a priest, as well as talking about his current work that he's doing in overseeing an Orthodox community in Lincoln, as well as planting England's newest Orthodox monastery. So yeah, very much looking forward to sharing that. But until then, thank you very much for watching. I hope you all have a Merry Christmas, and I'll see you in the next one.